There I was, minding my own business, listening to Magic lead designer Mark Rosewater's podcast, when...
But part of what I'm saying is, it is not a power creep thing where we're just incrementally making every set better than the rest.
Gamers always yell about power creep when a new expansion comes out for their favorite multiplayer game. Let's crack open the Ludonomicon to see if we can define power creep, really understand it, and see if we can find it in the game of Magic the Gathering. First, I need to be clear. Mark Rosewater is one of the best game designers out there. You should both listen to his podcast and, in general, take his word over mine in any game design discussion. However, in this instance, he may be too close to the problem to see it. Let's look at power creep, both as a general concept and in the game of Magic the Gathering. If you're not a Magic player, don't worry. I'm going to translate for normal humans instead of weirdos who remember everything that Questing Beast can do. How does Mark define power creep? In episode 661 from back in 2019, he says power creep is when a designer just keeps making sets more powerful. And then recently, in episode 1158, he says...
Let me talk about power creep for a second. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot, and I need to explain what power creep is. So one of the ways that you can sell a set is, let's say you make set A, and you set it at a certain power level. You then can make set B and put it at a higher power level. The cards in set B are, on average, more powerful than the cards in set A. And so people buy set B because they're excited. B is more powerful. Then you make set C. Set C is more powerful than set B and set A. And the idea of power creep is each set, at least on a slope line, meaning each set gets more powerful over time.
This is a narrow definition of power creep, and I think a true Scotsman has something to say about it. You've met a true Scotsman, right?
Oh, no Scotsman puts sugar on his porridge.
But my Uncle Angus is a Scotsman, and he puts sugar on his porridge.
But no true Scotsman puts sugar on his porridge. Ugh.
You commit the no true Scotsman fallacy when you propose a rule for a set of things, an exception is pointed out, and then you make it clear that your definition excludes that exception, because it's not true or real. Ahem.
There's no power creep in Magic.
But what about all these cards that are so much more powerful than my old cards?
Aye, but there's no true power creep in Magic.
Let's look into the research literature on power creep to see if I'm being fair. Now, don't run. This isn't as scary as it looks. In his paper, A Conservative Metric of Power Creep, Daniel Magruder operationalized power creep as two things. Wait, I haven't talked about operationalizing yet? Quick version. Most definitions, like the ones from my What is a Game video, are theoretical. They are good for communicating and to provide structure to thoughts, but they need to be put into an even more concrete form for an empirical study. This is often expressed as a formula in formal math or logic. Magruder's operationalized definition of power creep looks like this. If you want to dig into the math, you can look up the actual paper, but in plain language, the formula refers to two other definitions. The first is strictly better cards. What's strictly better? Glad you asked. Take these two cards, the older card Eviscerate and the card Fell from the recent Bloomburrow expansion. They had the exact same rules text, the same card type, sorcery, and the same color, black. But the new card costs less than the old one. This is what's generally referred to as strictly better. There is no circumstance where, from a pure power perspective, you would want the old card if the new one is available. Here's a graph of strictly better cards from the Magruder article. As you can see, these cards exist, and they appear more often now than they used to. There are two arguments to make against using this definition alone. One, many of the cards that get this treatment were not getting played. Eviscerate was not a card you would see that often, so very few people are upset about its glow-up. The new version, Fell, is a mediocre card, but playable in some circumstances, where Eviscerate just wasn't. The second reason is that Magic is a much more complex beast than this, and strictly better cards are less common than what I will call complexly better. Let's compare these two creatures, the classic Llanowar Elves and the recent Delighted Halfling. They are the same cost, 1 green mana, and they both do the same general thing. They make energy, mana, to cast other spells. We call them mana dorks.
Hey, who are you calling a dork?
I'm clearly better. I make a green mana instead of a stupid colourless.
As if. I have more toughness.
I am an elf, and there are way more cards that boost elves than halflings.
Yeah, but I can give you any color to cast a legendary spell and make it uncounterable.
This is what a lot of people love about Magic. The value of different cards is not straightforward, and figuring out which is better for your deck can melt your brain. That leads us to another definition of power creep. Another Magic designer, Sam Stoddard, doesn't define it directly in his column, but gives examples that imply that power creep is simply being able to create a more powerful deck at one point of time than at another earlier point. This feels more intuitive than either Rosewater's idea that power creep only exists when a whole set is better, or Magruder's more technical definition. Sam Stoddard argues that power creep, by his definition, is inevitable. On this, I actually think all parties agree. There are 3 reasons why power creep is inevitable. First, the card pool keeps expanding, so even if each card was perfectly balanced, synergies keep getting better. Think of how there are clear cases when you would want the halfling or the elf from the last page. As there are more and more mana dorks, you will get more and more targeted support for your deck. That makes it more powerful. The second reason is functional reprints. By the way, this is the second type of power creep in the Magruder article. When making a Magic deck, you are limited in how many copies of a card you can include, generally 4 or 1 copies depending on format. But sometimes a card is printed that is identical to an old card in all but name. This is often done for storytelling reasons. Llanowar, of elf fame, is a specific place on a specific world, Dominaria, in the Magic mythology. If a set doesn't take place there, it just can't contain a Llanowar elf. Enter the Elvish Mystic, a Llanowar elf by any other name for all those other worlds. We can now play with twice as many as these lovely little mana dorks, making a deck more reliable and more powerful. By introducing a card that is literally, mathematically, identical to an old card, the power level has crept up. The third and final reason why power creep is inevitable is that designers are only human. Or Lego in my case. Sometimes they miss the mark and create a card that is more powerful than they thought. I would argue that the team at Wizards is better at hitting the target than any other team in the world, but they have made tens of thousands of cards. Some are going to be too powerful, even if only by a hair. Then all other cards will be judged against those mistakes, pushing power up and up and up. The problem with Mark's definition is that you play Magic with cards and decks, not sets. I think I know what he is thinking of when he talks about power creep. He may be thinking of miniatures games, particularly Warhammer 40,000, 40k for the kids in the know. That game has a problem specifically referred to as codex creep. Armies periodically get a book with new rules and units, called a codex, and each codex has a nasty habit of being the best one, only to be outdone by the next. 40k can get away with this because periodically they release a new rules edition that clears away all the old junk and resets the baseline. Magic doesn't reset. Cards that were legal in the beginning are still legal now. An army in 40k is a distinct thing. It is possible to swap around some units between armies, but mostly it's beneficial to play entirely with units from one codex. One very powerful unit can make for a powerful army. Magic's not like that. Cards in a deck will come from all over the place. Every set will have individual powerful cards, but Mark Rosewater argues that a set overall has to be more powerful than what came before to count as powercraft. I think this is a no true Scotsman fallacy, but I would like to find some data to see if we can falsify or support Rosewater's definition on its own terms. I can imagine a couple of ways to do this. We could do it experimentally. Pit the top decks from the last 20 years of the rotating format of Standard against each other in a grand tournament to see if more recent sets are more powerful. Unfortunately, I don't have the facilities to do that. I'm a filthy casual player and don't have access to a couple dozen top players and $1,000 decks. Fortunately, the data we need is already out there. Let's look at the top decks in the Modern format. Modern lets in just about every card since 2003. A total of, wow, 94 sets. All else being equal, you should expect that each of these should have about 1 or 2% of the cards in these decks. However, all things are not equal. 4 of those sets have been designed to make a splash in this format. Modern Masters 1, 2, 3, and The Lord of the Rings, Tales of Middle-earth. It would be surprising if each of these did not make up more than its fair share, but they can be compared to each other at least. I used the average deck list for the 7 decks listed as Tier 1 in Modern on mtgdecks.net as of the writing of this piece in August 2024. I simply checked off the set that each unique card came from for each deck, and then added all the decks together. So, if a deck had 4 copies of the One Ring, that counts as 1 point for Lord of the Rings. But if 4 different decks had the One Ring, it would be 4 for Lord of the Rings. For those of you who keep up with Magic news, this was the height of Hotbird Summer. Nadu has since been banned, but that is 1 card enabling 1 deck. I think the conclusions will be resilient to removing it. I did not code lands, because I am lazy. Let's look at the data. Wow, I wasn't kidding. Those 4 sets do take up a lot of the chart. The 4 Modern targeted sets provide about half the cards in the top metagame, and the other 90-odd sets provide the other half. But let's just look at the Modern targeted sets. I honestly started crunching these numbers with the intent of saying, see, it's not that bad. But yeah, it is. I chose to look at Modern because I was aware of how dominant some of these cards had been, so I thought this would be an extreme case, but I never thought it would be this clear. This is what power creep looks like by Mark Rosewater's definition.
And the idea of power creep is each set, at least on a slope line, meaning each set gets more powerful over time.
With the exception of a dip down for Lord of the Rings, that is a very consistent slope. Let me unpack this. For each card in the first Modern Horizons that is still worthy of inclusion in a top deck, there are 3 from Modern Horizons 2. For each worthy card in MH2, there are almost 3 from MH3. To be clear, the first Modern Horizons set came out in 2019, and by this metric, the power level of sets has increased 9 times in 5 years. That feels unsustainable. I'm sad now.